Hello, this is Tom Cahill. It's Tuesday, the 4th of December 2015. The year's almost over. I haven't been doing some videos for a while, but anyway, I'll keep this one brief. What it's about is, and it's going to be brief because there's not much to it. What it's about is the Madeline McCann case, which I would term the worst cover-up in history, right? Anybody who really thinks about it will come to the conclusion eventually that the sheer amount of lies and disinformation that's come out about that case, from even if you take it from a person-by-person basis, so you take either the mother, the father, or any of their friends who constantly keep changing their stories, it's actually improbable that they would be able to change their stories that much. It would actually be easier for them to actually stick to a consistent story. It would actually make more sense for their story to be more consistent than what they are, because they constantly change. They're constantly allegedly slipping up, and I say allegedly because I'm not so sure they are slipping up. I think it might be part of a plan. I'm absolutely convinced that they're being told what to say, and that the slipping up isn't actually slipping up. It's all part of a distraction. And like my initial point is that the whole thing is just distraction news. Now, a lot of people have said things like the creche signing details are clearly being written by different people and added in extra, like later on and stuff like that, saying that there's no actual evidence really that the little girl was alive the day that they said she was, or even around. It doesn't really matter if she's alive or not. The fact is she wasn't even present the day that they said she went missing. And I think that's really the most important part of it. The McCanns, there's no possible way that this idea that they just had some dirt on some people in the British establishment, so all of a sudden they all flew out there, like top government spin doctors and stuff went out there. All that stuff doesn't make any sense whatsoever. There's no way they could have just done that, mobilised them all in that time. If someone just phoned them up and said, right, we've got some dirt and we're in trouble, you need to help us. Because you've got to remember that if a little kid's accidentally died or gone missing, they'd be prime suicided candidates, wouldn't they? If they were bumped off, they could just say, oh, well, Jerry fell off the balcony when he was drunk and hit his head, and Kate was so overcome with grief she killed herself, or whatever. They could kill one of them just to scare the other one. It would be very, very easy, or they could arrange a car crash. There's loads of ways of easily killing somebody if you want, especially when you take into account the amount of people involved with this case. And what it occurs to me is that it was all about a cover-up, and the idea that it was a reactive cover-up, like they saw the opportunity to use that as a cover-up, I think is highly unlikely, unless literally the little girl died several days before, and then they thought that maybe they could use it. That is plausible, but I think it's unlikely. It has even occurred to me that with the amount of lies that's around that case and the litigiousness of the couple or whoever's controlling them, that there might not have even been a Madeline McCann. The whole thing might just be a complete fabrication. She might not have even existed. It's not inconceivable to me. But what is inconceivable is the fallback position, which is the parents just happened to kill her on holiday and then they just threw all these masses and masses of resources at it. It's also important to remember that the policeman from England who's heading up what they call an investigation, but it can't be an investigation because it can only be an investigation if the Portuguese police are doing it, because it's in Portugal. But he was the guy who fitted up Barry George, wasn't he? And Barry George has now been released from prison for allegedly murdering Jill Dando. Now they said he didn't, and they've refused to give him any compensation. Again, very, very, very weird. But again, it was obvious he was set up from day one anyway. Lots of these cases, you've got to understand that it's easy to fit someone up. So why would you fit someone up and then let them get away with it? Or, why would you fit them up and then not look for the murderer still, considering you fitted somebody up? So that means all the evidence was contrived and why those police are still in jobs. Again, the whole point of it is, I've known this Madeline McCann thing is a massive distraction news piece. And like with everything, if you've got a plan to use something as a distraction, you don't wait for something to come along to use. You actually, plan that thing and then use it so it corresponds with other events that are happening at the time. And the really big thing is, I've shared this thinking with a few people, and someone I sort of have quite a lot of respect for a lot of their ideas. He said to me, "Well, I'm just going to do a date check," and sometimes it's better when you're doing something if somebody else actually does one aspect for it, because you've got a few things going through your mind. It's not something I spend a lot of time thinking about in the Madeline McCann case. All it makes me think about is the fact that there's so much nonsense about it that absolutely anything could be fabricated. So you're really speculating on unreliable speculation and reports and stuff which have all been proven to be very suspect. And if the DNA wasn't planted in the apartment showing there was a dead person in there, then obviously they'd be prime candidates and they'd get convicted. So, but I'm not saying that the DNA couldn't have been planted there. Do you see what I mean? That could just be another element of the confusion to make you think she was in Portugal, or very likely was in Portugal when she possibly really wasn't. But anyway, I consulted this person and he just did a quick search on the internet and he said, well, look what happened around the same date. And this is where it gets very interesting. And what it was is the 7/7, some kind of report was getting put out by the government a couple of days before, I believe, before Madeline McCann allegedly went missing. So you've got a report into 7/7. Now, the problem with 7/7 is that due to our reliably unreliable train system, none of the bombers were actually in London to plant the bombs or, to carry the backpacks where the explosions happened. So they weren't there, so they couldn't possibly be on the train, and there was no CCTV evidence. And as you know, London's riddled with CCTV, and it's all date stamped, and there'd be absolutely no problem proving that they're on the trains if they're on the trains, and they can't do this. Also, Mohammed Dasiki Khan or whatever, he went missing before, and he didn't even attempt to go to London that day. There's no evidence that he went to London because it seems he got cold feet and got murdered beforehand, or at least got taken out of the picture beforehand, and his widow hasn't been saying anything since. His wife miscarried, by the way. So the British establishment, anyone with any brains knows, has got absolutely no respect for the citizenry of Britain, and especially not children. It makes no difference. They'll quite happily cause children to miscarry, and they won't feel sorry for themselves, feel sorry about any of that kind of stuff. Now, if you look at Nick Collestrom's book, Terror on the Tube, if you read that book and you come out the other end thinking that there's any doubt that that whole thing is a complete setup, and more fundamentally, the fact that there is absolutely no way those men were in London that day at that time, because as I said, he's proven that the train didn't run, that they were meant to have got on. So they weren't on the train. Other people who got that train every day and sat in the same carriage every day and stood at the same point on the platform every day in Luton, none of them came forward and said they'd seen them. They all seemed to say they didn't see them. So there's no way they could have possibly got to London on time. And then there's the account of the, I think it was an Indian station master or one of the more senior British, London Underground staff, saying that Jermaine Lindsay, the Jamaican suicide bomber, again another little insider joke. Jamaicans do not blow themselves up. That's just ridiculous. He went and was very flustered, and he said he needs to speak to the station master, and this guy said, oh, he's not around or whatever, and this resulted in, eventually these guys obviously got murdered. They got murdered in Canary Wharf, and this was actually reported in New Zealand and Australia in the main news, and then it just got pushed out of the news. But anyway, so I think that the whole Madeline McCann case was just a cover-up for the 7/7 report, which was really, really, really damning. Would have been really damning if people had started looking into it, but they just managed to keep it out of the news, because otherwise that would have been the main thing in the news, because of the fact that Madeline McCann had gone missing allegedly. Right, so I think the whole thing was planned. Now, further to that, we also have to take into account this guy called Goncalo Amaral, right? He was the Portuguese detective who is allegedly getting sued by the McCanns, and he's appealing it at the minute, I believe, because he put out our book, which didn't give out anything confidential, it wasn't in the public domain, and it was all about what he thought that the McCanns did it, and he's entitled to, you can't get sued for libel for saying I think that they did it, and also he only mentioned things that are in the public domain anyway, because in Portugal they have to release the police files after a certain amount of time, so he didn't not give out anything that couldn't have been found by anybody. and he just gave his opinion. And he, explained what he was going to do based on the evidence he had. Now, that means there couldn't have been a libel hearing. That there was a libel hearing, but you can't sue someone for libel because you didn't like something they said. You have to have it has to be untrue, yeah? So if it wasn't untrue, then he couldn't be sued for libel. So the whole thing's a sham. He's obviously deliberately not defended himself because he's obviously in on it. Now, I'm not saying he wants to be in on it, but he obviously, he's complicit in the thing because there's no way he could possibly get sued for libel if he hasn't told any lies. And he's just said, I thought they did it and I was going to arrest them, they were going to be charged, and that's what was going to happen. That's not libel. So if you take that into account, you've got to realise that's probably all part of the scam as well. Now, recently, a few months ago in April, there's a picture of him, I think it was on April the 27th actually. He was coming out of court and he's flashing the Masonic M hand sign like that, right? You can't do that sign by accident. These two fingers don't push themselves together naturally, and these ones pull out the side. He's doing a Masonic M hand sign, and all this nonsense about him getting sued and him appealing is all just more distraction news, because in many ways, this worst cover-up in the history of cover-ups, because it isn't a cover-up, it's a deliberate distraction, which naturally has to be self-deprecatory against the people involved in the cover-up because they're trying to cover up something else. So it tries to make out there's been lots of failings. The Portuguese authorities are obviously involved in it up to their necks. They obviously, for a start off, they should be formally objecting to the English claiming to have investigations in their sovereign territory, which they can't do. They should, but they haven't really bothered doing that. What I believe it is that mainland Europe, especially the Mediterranean countries, were very badly hit by Operation Gladio. And as the 7/7 bombings is effectively an extension of Operation Gladio, the fact that the English ballsed it up, or the British and Israelis ballsed it up so badly, they've probably done a deal with the Portuguese authorities, and they probably got them to agree that if they allow them this little indiscretion of allowing them to help fudge the Madeline McCann bullshit case, where there's probably no one even died, or there's no evidence really that the Portuguese police have to run with. The British want to pull out their suspects. No Portuguese have died. I believe that's what it is. I believe there won't be any fake Muslim attacks in Portugal as a result of them supporting the enormous balls up, which is Britain's balls up of 7/7, which is just a diabolical disgrace of a mess. Because we can't run the trains on time, yeah? And so that's what I think. And I'd go further than that, and I'd say that as a result of this, it's not significant if Portugal are one place in Europe where they don't have any fake Muslim terrorism. It really doesn't matter. But what does matter is if Britain's found out to be faking terrorism events in recent history, because you've got to remember that they've been caught doing it in Northern Ireland. They were doing it all the time. They've been caught doing it in Iraq, and they went to a great extent to cover up those two SAS men who got caught, with bombs shooting at Arabs dressed up as Arabs. They took down an entire police station. Was it a police station and jail with tanks? They killed loads of Iraqis who were meant to be on our side. They were like these sort of, the traitor Iraqis who were cooperating with the English and the Americans. So they'll go to great lengths to do this. So I'm not saying that Goncalo Amaril's a bad guy, but I am saying that whole libel trial is a sham, right? And unless somebody can show me what they actually objected to and said was not true, there's no way there could be a libel case. Of course, if they put in a libel case, it's allowed in. It sort of slips under the radar. It's allowed in. He accepts it and doesn't fight it properly somehow. Very similar to Sally Burko's lawyer in the McAlpine case, carter-ruck. I forget which member of carter-ruck it was, but they deliberately didn't fight the fact she hadn't committed libel, and the fact that, defamation, and the fact that it couldn't be defamatory anyway, because lots of people have published that McAlpine was a paedophile in the past and claimed to have affidavits from victims. The whole thing's a complete scam. I mean, the thing with this is I'm looking at this in like sort of strategic terms from the point of view of somebody who doesn't care whether a little kid got killed or not. Most people get so caught up with the fact that little kid's been killed, which, you know, is upsetting, and it does upset me. But the point is, you've got to use your brain when you're actually thinking. You've got to remember, if you're dealing with psychopaths who can't be trusted and are always doing evil stuff, and they think nothing of killing tens of thousands or millions of people just to get some, you know, contracts or just to diddle with the oil prices, they don't give a fuck about any little kid. So to start going, oh, but I don't like the McCanns. Nobody likes the McCanns. If you look at them and you think about it, they're not nice people. And that's but they are being used, you know? So I think if people look at it in that light, the 7/7 balls up, which is the biggest balls up in fake terrorism history, you know, ever, you know, because this wasn't them allowing people to find out about it like 9/11. They didn't want people to find out that was set up. They did not want people to find out the terrorists couldn't possibly have been there. That was a massive balls up. That wasn't the aim of the exercise. It was a massive balls up. And again, probably John Charles Menendez, who was an electrician, he was probably killed as a result to scare other people off who knew that it was a balls up, who'd probably been playing along with it, not knowing what they were doing, you know, doing some wiring in the underground, putting in whatever the devices were that caused the accidents on the trains. And we also remember, don't we, that there was a lot of ambiguity about what trains blew up, or if they even blew up, or whether it was an electrical pulse weapon or something, some weird electrical thing. The trains blew up from outside rather than inside. People who were meant to be sat next to the bombers were fine, and then people like several meters away, like 20 meters away, were dead, and people's feet were blown off, and the rest of their body wasn't hurt. All this stuff, it's all very suspect. But as I said, I can't recommend his book, Terror on the Tube by Nick Colostrom, if you want to find out more about that, because that's an excellent book, and I think he's put about 3 revisions of it, and it's very good. And as I said, his mate Keith Motherson, Motherson, got murdered around the same time as this as well, which is also, I would say, not insignificant. He was helping Nick with his book. Anyway, I'm Tom Carhill. It's Tuesday, the 4th of December, 2015. Give me some comments, and hopefully we'll some of you will come up with some interesting insight that I hadn't thought of. Thanks a lot. Bye bye.